We always begin with our superintendent's 11 commitments. This time we're focusing on always start with the why as our commitment, number one. Always starting with the why is so important in any kind of behavior support planning because all behavior is communication. That's something we're going to focus on really strongly today through this training. No human being engages in any behavior for no reason. Behaviors don't just come out of nowhere. Problem behaviors don't just erupt to make our teachers angry. There's always a why behind behavior. And in behavior support planning, the most important element is identifying the why and identifying a path forward to meet that why in another way. The essential function of challenging behaviors is to communicate to adults that a kid doesn't possess the skills to handle certain demands in certain situations. The vast majority of challenging kids already know how we want them to behave. They know they're supposed to do what they're told. They know they're not supposed to disrupt the learning of their classmates or run out of the school when they're upset or embarrassed. And they know they're not supposed to hit people, swear, or call out in the class. So they don't need us to put lots of effort in teaching them how we want them to behave. And while this may be hard to believe, most challenging kids already want to behave the right way. They don't need us to continue giving them stickers, depriving them of recess, or suspending them from school. They are already motivated. They need something else from us. Whether a kid is sulking, pouting, whining, withdrawing, refusing to talk, crying, spitting, screaming, swearing, running out of the classroom, hitting, kicking, destroying property, or worse, you won't know what to do about the challenging behavior until you understand why it's occurring. Lagging skills. And pinpoint the specific situations in which it occurs. Unsolved problems. Lagging skills are the why of challenging behavior. Unsolved problems tell us when the behavior is occurring. Challenging behaviors occur when the demands and expectations being placed upon a child outstrip the skills he has to respond, adapt. Students who can behave well will. Students with the skills to behave well will behave well because everybody wants to be reinforced and accepted by their peers and their teachers. What we need to do in behavior support planning is teach kids the skills that are lagging to meet the needs that they have. Teach kids how to meet their need for attention appropriately. We have to teach kids how to meet their need for escaping a task appropriately, or how to meet their need for gaining access to something appropriately. So as we go through this training, we're going to talk about how we're going to do that, how we identify what that why is and what those lagging skills are, and how we identify what we're going to teach them instead. Chaim Ganat said, "Misbehavior and punishment are not opposites that cancel each other. On the contrary, they breed and reinforce each other." When we focus on punishment or reinforcement solely as the solutions to behavioral problems, we're not focusing on the real problem. The real problem is the lagging skills that the student has and the inappropriate means of meeting the need, right? And so what we need to do as behavior support specialists is figure out a way to meet those needs in appropriate ways. Punishment is not going to be effective. Even reinforcement is not going to be effective to a certain degree if we don't teach the skills that the student requires to get their needs met appropriately.
Did you unscrew all the Phillips heads?
Check. Did you unscrew all the flatheads?
Yep, and now we wait. Now go hide the evidence while I walk around saying, "What happened? Who would do such a thing?"
I'll return these to the shop room. What's left of it.
Shh, don't tell him I'm here.
I know you're there, Skinner. I'd recognize those discolored hush puppies anywhere.
Hear that? He thinks my Try and Save brand shush mutts are genuine hush puppies. We've got the how, we've got the who, but we don't have the why.
Here it is.
Bart and Milhouse, as obnoxious as they may be, their behaviors didn't come from nowhere. Their behaviors came from a desire to communicate a need that wasn't being met elsewhere. So why? Why did they engage in that behavior? What did they need? Were they trying to get or obtain something? Or were they trying to escape or protest something? Maybe it was attention. Perhaps he's not getting the kind of attention that he needs from home or at home, and he's not differentiating between positive and negative attention. And when Mr. Skinner yells at him through the car door, that gives him what he wants. We need to figure out a way to meet his need in an appropriate way. So this is where the behavior support plan comes into place. When we identify what is being communicated through their behaviors, through data and observation, we can also identify a more appropriate way for us to meet that communicative intent through a replacement behavior, a functionally equivalent replacement behavior, meaning something that meets the same need, but that works for us as school staff. The behavior support plans are not built primarily on systems of rewards and punishments. We spoke about that a bit earlier. It's not a plan for reinforcement. It's not a description of the good behavior we expect from a student, and it's not a means to an end. So a behavior plan is not, let's get together and figure out what kind of reinforcement this student needs and put a token board in place. Those are all good things, but those things do not address the problem, right? Those things do facilitate some appropriate behavior because we're reinforcing it, but they don't address the real problem, which is, what is the communicative intent to the behavior? What's the function of the behavior? And how can we address that function and provide them with a replacement behavior? The behavior support plan is all about teaching lagging skills, teaching skills that kids don't have, and ways for them to meet needs that they have in more appropriate ways.
Behavior pathway charting is a tool that we can use to simplify the behavior support plan development process. When we sit and collaborate as a team, all the parties involved help us fill in each of the boxes. We have 3 pathways with the chart. We have the upper, middle, and lower pathway. The upper pathway is the desired behavior that we would like to see the student display. Typically what you see in the upper pathway is student will complete work, student will be compliant and follow directions, student will stay in their seat, things like that. The middle pathway is effectively the ABC data that we've collected prior to developing the behavior support plan. The ABC data would include the antecedents, the behavior, and the consequences. The lower pathway is where we develop the acceptable alternative behavior that the student would display. So for example, if the student was calling out in class to get attention, the maintaining consequence is the attention. The acceptable alternative, or FERB, is something that we're willing to accept in lieu of the student calling out. Remember, the replacement behavior is supposed to give the student the attention that would be maintaining the problem behavior. All right, so we're gonna look at Aaron. And one thing I'd like to point out about Aaron in this case is that Aaron has no disabilities. So I think this is important to point out because each of your campuses should have tiered interventions in place at this point in time. You should have level 1, level 2, and level 3 interventions, or tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So as a function of general ed, you can also create a behavior support plan for a student, and there's no need for them to be in special education. So as we break down Aaron as an example, what do we have here that we could identify as an antecedent, a behavior, a consequence for him? We have work produced as less than adequate. When there's a 30-minute period in which he has not been able to talk to his peers, he will immediately start talking off task. When the teacher changes the activity, he has the opportunity to talk to his peers. We also have the teacher knows Aaron is striving for attention and has often left him out of activities because he is just too hard to manage. All right, so let's fill in a pathway chart on Aaron. Okay, so using the pathway chart, we're going to have a discussion here about Aaron really quick. So let's first identify Aaron's problem behavior. What would that be?
So it seems like the problem behavior is that Aaron talks off task during a transition. Is that the problem behavior that you've noticed?
But you're talking transitioning and you're talking off task. What's the main cause? What's the main problem?
Well, we also have that his work production is less than adequate.
And we're making him go 30 minutes without talking. He can't go 30 minutes.
So, but specifically the problem, like there's a problem that exists that's impeding his educational progress that we need to identify, or impeding the progress of the kids around him. To me, it sounds like the problem is that he's talking off task and disrupting people around him.
So could we have him every 10 minutes have a break where he can talk to his shoulder partner? If that's the main problem?
We might. Why don't we agree first on the problem behavior? Because I hear Brian saying it's talking off task
During transitions.
during transitions. I'm feeling that he's not able to transition. What do you think?
Well, I think that's what we kind of need to nail down is the problem behavior itself is the one that's causing problems, right? That's the one impeding. So is the problem behavior the talking off task itself, or is the problem behavior the disrupting transitions? Like, should we identify the problem behavior as the talking and the transitions as an antecedent, or is it the transition itself that's a problem behavior?
You know, the talking off task might be the problem behavior. And then what we'll do next is let's look at triggering antecedents. So what happens right before he talks off task? I know, Brian, I think you mentioned transitions.
Yep. When Aaron has a 30-minute period where he's not been able to talk to his peers.
Okay, we have 30-minute period. There's also listed in the write-up for Aaron, we have isolated seat work, and then we also have lecture.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it sounds like we have talking off task for the problem behavior. Antecedents would be lecture, isolated seat work, and transitions. And then setting event, we also have a 30-minute period without talking to peers.
So I guess setting event, then it would be any time when Aaron's not allowed to interact directly with peers. And we know that's what's when the triggering antecedent happens then. The triggering antecedent then would be a transition, and then that would lead to him talking off task, right?
And he needs to get the attention in an appropriate way that we will accept as the adults.
Okay, so that brings us to maintaining consequences. Dory, you just hit that spot on with attention. And then I think inside the write-up it said Aaron is striving for attention and has often left him out of activities.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we have the ABCs taken care of. Let's look at the desired alternative. So instead of talking off task, what would we like Aaron to do?
Well, we'd like him to stay in his seat and do his work.
Okay.
Get a good grade in his class.
So you're hitting the whole upper pathway with that. So what if we look at, instead of talking off task, we'd like him to remain on task? So we have remain on task for a desired alternative. And then typical consequence is what? He's going to complete his work,
Get good grades in class, right?
earn good grades.
Graduate A through G.
Perfect. All right, so now we need an acceptable alternative behavior. So we're going to look at developing a functionally equivalent replacement behavior for Aaron
For the attention.
that he can do in lieu of talking off task. So let's remember the top pathway is what the desired behaviors are that we want the student to display. And the bottom pathway, the lower pathway, is the acceptable alternative. So we identified earlier that we want the problem behavior is that he talks off task. So the desired alternative would be that he remains on task and on topic, right?
Right. So then what would be an acceptable alternative? If the desired alternative, which is, stay on task, on topic, and then, the consequence for that is get a great grade and do well in class, what alternative will we accept?
Well, he should be able to talk off task to his peers at specific times in class.
Right. So if we allowed him some time to talk off task with peers,
or maybe just time to talk with peers, period.
That's true.
So then for the FERB, for the replacement behavior, that he would engage with peers at designated times in class.
At designated times in class.
Teacher
Yeah.
designated times?
Mhm.
So the alternative, the acceptable alternative, or the replacement behavior will be to engage with peers at appropriate time or at teacher designated times in class, and then we'll just have to identify in our environmental supports when exactly that will be and how he'll access it.
Correct, because the environmental supports, we named a whole bunch earlier. We have talking with, he can talk with peers like a pair share. We had classroom jobs, planned movement breaks, a buddy break, warnings for transitions. We've identified quite a few. All right, so let's fill out the form.
Here's the Moreno Valley Unified SELPA BSP form. This BSP form can be found in the SACE document library. If you click on references and go down to document library, search for behavior support plan, it'll be there. It can be found in SharePoint and also in the SELPA manual. The BSP form should be attached to the IEP. And if you want some feedback on your behavior support plan as you draft it, feel free to share it with one of the behavior program specialists and we'd be happy to provide some feedback on it. When you attach the BSP to the IEP, it should be done either as an amendment or during the annual review. The case manager should bring a draft of the BSP. And although you will develop the draft of the BSP prior to the meeting, remember that the development of the behavior support plan is a team process. So you should be prepared to talk about the behavior support plan with the team in the meeting, share ideas, and collaborate with other stakeholders in the IEP meeting in drafting your final behavior support plan. A behavior support plan should be drafted by the IEP team when there have been 4 or more behavioral contacts within a 60-day period, after 5 days of suspension, or if behavior goals are not sufficient to address the problem behavior. The idea of the behavior support plan is to support one behavior. So we're picking one most impactful behavior that we can address specifically on the behavior support plan. Also, it's important to note that the behavior support plan is a different document from the behavior intervention plan that you will find as a SACE form. The behavior intervention plan is different from the behavior support plan in that it is informed by the results of a functional behavior assessment and would be the next level of intervention if a behavior support plan is not effective. The behavior support plan should be viewed as a working document. You may hypothesize a replacement behavior that ends up being ineffective, or you may need to identify other reinforcers. The behavior support plan should be reviewed every 4 to 6 weeks by the IEP team, and if it continues to be ineffective, the IEP team should consider offering a functional behavior assessment to develop a behavior intervention plan to provide further support to the student. If a behavior support plan is determined by the team to be no longer required, the team needs to convene and discuss why the behavior support plan is no longer required to end the support of the behavior support plan. So this is the first section of the behavior support plan. And in this section, we want to identify, again, one behavior that comes from our observed data, and we want to identify the most impactful behavior. So what is the particular behavior operationally defined that is the most impactful in impeding the student from making academic progress? So when we say an operationally defined maladaptive behavior, again, we're talking about one behavior. Operationally defined means, what does this behavior look like? Very clearly describe exactly what this behavior is. Using language like student engages in inappropriate behavior in class, or the student is disrespectful to teachers, is not necessarily an operational definition, and that's going to make it very difficult for the team to identify what a replacement behavior can be if we don't have a very specific definition of the behavior. That operational definition should come from observed data. A really helpful data sheet when you're trying to collect this data and define and operationally define the problem behavior would be like, for example, an antecedent behavior consequence data sheet where you're documenting what's happening right before the behavior to identify antecedents, documenting the behavior itself in specific terms, and then documenting any consequences of behavior. Consequence meaning anything that happens as a result of the behavior. So the next section is the setting or triggering events This is an example of an antecedent behavior consequence data sheet that I mentioned in the previous slide. In the setting events is really where we identify those antecedents. Where does this behavior take place? What are the settings where it takes place, right? It could be behavior takes place primarily in Mr. Jones's class during second period when quadratic equation formulas are introduced, right? That would be a really clear one, so we know exactly what was triggering the behavior. Think about when and where the behavior occurs. Are there certain staff or students that are present when the behavior tends to occur? Are there certain tangibles present? Are there particular sensory factors at play when the behavior is present? Identifying the function of the behavior is really the crucial turning point of the behavior support plan. This is that why, right? This is the big why. When we identify the function of the behavior, we want to figure out with data, right? What the student is gaining or avoiding as a result of this behavior. So we're hypothesizing what the student is gaining or avoiding as a result of this behavior based on the data and the observation that we have, right? So is the result of the behavior that the student gets out of academic work? Is the result of the behavior that student gets a lot of direct peer or staff attention when they engage in the behavior, right? I recently met a student who would engage in all kinds of inappropriate behavior inside the classroom, using inappropriate language, running around the classroom, and this student was so articulate. When I spoke to him about the behavior, he made it really easy for me and said, I do bad things so that I can see the people in the office that I like. I like to get attention. So he made it very easy for me. It's not always that easy, right? We have to kind of decipher what the function is, what the communicative intent is of the behavior through our data. But sometimes they just give you the answer. Sometimes it's obvious when you look at the consequence of the behavior. This is the section where we'll introduce the replacement behavior. Okay, the replacement behavior needs to be functionally equivalent, meaning it should meet the same need for the student that the problem behavior meets, right? We discussed already what all those needs could potentially be. We could have, for example, a student who has a sensory need, right? Who has a sensory need to clap in their classroom or something like that, right? And that's disruptive to the class. So we can try to identify another way for them to get the same sensory input that's an acceptable behavior to engage in the class, right? Or another place for them to get the kind of sensory input that they need, right? So this is where we're trying to identify what the replacement behavior will look like. Again, it is really important that the consequence, meaning the outcome of the replacement behavior, should be as similar as possible to the consequence or the outcome of the problem behavior. It should meet the same need as the problem behavior. This is one of the most difficult things for us to wrap our minds around as the purpose of the behavior support plan, because oftentimes if the maintaining consequence of the problem behavior is escape, we need to provide the student another means to escape, right? If when they get a math assignment, they want to get out of math and they behave inappropriately, flip tables, throw chairs, whatever, and they get out of math, we need to provide them a break card or a signal or a stack of easier work that they can use when things become challenging so that they can still escape, right? As teachers, that's very difficult for us to allow a student to escape from our academic work or from the demands that we're placing on them. But if you really think about it, they're escaping already and they're not getting the academic work that we're giving them by engaging in the inappropriate behavior. So the replacement behavior is step one, right, toward appropriate behavior in the future. Once they can use a replacement behavior appropriately, now we can begin to reinforce when they use replacement behaviors, and then also reinforce when they engage in our appropriate and our expected behaviors, which in this case would be engaging in the academic work that we give them. And hopefully, once the problem behaviors decrease and the replacement behavior is being used more frequently, and we reinforce the preferred behavior, which is the engagement in academic work, then the engagement in academic work will increase. It's a much more reliable path to get a student to increase their engagement in academic work than just fighting and expecting that they're going to engage in appropriate behavior all the time. So replacement behaviors, a little bit more in detail. A replacement behavior is a behavior that will teach and reinforce, okay? A replacement behavior is not the expected behavior. This is not the end game, right? This behavior, again, serves the same purpose or function as the problem behavior, but it's more socially acceptable and tolerable in the environment where the behavior is occurring. Your classroom, the playground, the NPR, whatever. A replacement behavior is not the absence of the problem behavior. So often when we support teams in developing behavior support plans, everybody wants to get to the end. And we'll define a replacement behavior as Jimmy will behave appropriately in math class and will do all his work. Well, that doesn't meet the same need as the problem behavior, especially if the need is escape, right? That good behavior might be where we want to get, but that's not what the replacement behavior is. These are teaching strategies, supports, and reinforcements for the use of the replacement behavior, not for the use of the appropriate behavior that we want to see in the end, right? So we discussed earlier how the BSP document really is a document to facilitate skill development for the use of appropriate replacement behaviors. So here we outline what our strategy is for teaching those replacement behaviors. So maybe the student's going to be sat down and taught how to use their break card for escape. That whenever you get frustrated, you can either use a break card or you can go do this other task that's easier for you. How will we teach the strategies? When will we teach the strategies? And who will teach the strategies? Then we need to identify environmental supports. This might be where we identify our token board, right? Because so often we identify a token economy or a token board or some kind of reinforcement system. Well, we might need to identify that when a student uses the replacement behavior, they're going to get a token on their token board, or they're going to earn $1 in the class economy, right? And then reinforcement schedule, how are we going to maintain this appropriate replacement behavior? How are we going to reinforce the replacement behavior? What we're reinforcing here is the replacement behavior and not necessarily the appropriate behavior. What is going to be the strategy if the student uses the problem behavior to meet the need instead of the replacement behavior? Well, we want to have a strategy to redirect and prompt the student to switch to the replacement behavior instead of the problem behavior, right? If John starts flipping tables because he doesn't want to do his math work, maybe that's when I need to walk over to him and say, hey, John, remember, you've got your break card. That's the way that you're going to get out of your math work. It's important that you build into your reactive strategy that the problem behavior is no longer effective, right? We don't want the problem behavior to still meet the need once we have the replacement behavior. So for my little guy who explained to me that he likes to behave inappropriately in class and use inappropriate language because he loves to get the attention of the people in the office, that can't work anymore. The only thing that can work for him to get the attention of the people in the office is for him to use whatever replacement behavior we define. Right. We don't allow the student to get the maintaining consequence until they use the replacement behavior to get that consequence instead of the problem behavior. And then you want to outline how you're going to debrief with students when they use the problem behavior afterward, what the consequences might be. And remember that especially for bigger problem behaviors, just because a BSP is in place, it doesn't mean the sequential discipline guide is not in effect. The discipline guide can remain in effect when problem behaviors occur. I've seen teams go so far as create a flowchart for exactly how somebody's going to react to a problem behavior and exactly how somebody's going to redirect to the preferred replacement behavior, and post those flowcharts on the wall so that anytime a student engages in negative behavior, somebody can easily reference exactly how they're supposed to respond. In the progress monitoring section, we want to identify how we plan to collect data, how we plan to monitor the use of the replacement behavior, because again, remember, this is all about monitoring the replacement behavior, not necessarily the preferred behavior. So how are we going to collect data on the use of the replacement behavior? And when are we going to review the plan? As we said before, the BSPs should be reviewed every, I think we said 4 to 6 weeks before. The IEP team should convene again and discuss whether or not the replacement behavior is effective, whether or not the BSP is being effective, and if we need to modify the BSP, that would be the time to do it, right? Because remember, the replacement behavior and the function of the behavior are hypothesized based on our data. It could be that we're incorrect and the student is engaging in inappropriate behavior in class, they're flipping tables, we think that it's escape, but it's actually attention, right? And that might not become clear until we start teaching that replacement behavior for escape and it's ineffective. And then we need to change the replacement behavior to get him attention or something instead. How are we going to communicate the BSP both to the student and to staff, right? If we're expecting that a student is going to use an appropriate replacement behavior to meet the same need, everybody who's a stakeholder, everybody who's going to have access to the student or be part of that student's instructional team or support team needs to know that, right? Because if I go to my first period class and my break card works for escape, and then I go to my second period class and that teacher refuses to allow me to escape when I use my break card, do you think I'm going to be willing to continue using my break card as a replacement behavior? Probably not, right? So it's very important that everybody knows exactly what the replacement behavior is and what the response to the appropriate behavior and the response to the problem behavior is going to be. CSOs, transportation, health office, instructional aides, administration. Details of the plan need to be shared with anybody who's going to be working with or have access to that student. We also need to identify how progress is going to be communicated to parents. You may want to encourage parents to use the same replacement behaviors at home and to avoid allowing the problem behavior to result in the same consequence, the maintaining consequence at home as well. Thank you for watching our Behavior Support Plan training video. If you'd like to take your Behavior Support Plan training to the next level, you can complete this activity. I'm going to put a video in of some students in a classroom. What you can do is go ahead and watch the video, pick one of the students, identify the problem behavior, identify the function of the problem behavior, fill out the pathway charting document as we've done the training for in this video, and fill out a behavior support plan document for the student that you choose, and then go ahead and send it to myself or Dora Conrad or John Ferenga. I'll include our email addresses. We'll review the documents for you, provide some feedback, and once they're complete, we will send you this very fancy certificate of completion here with your name on it for you to keep and post and do whatever you'd like with.
I'm distributing a recent newspaper, and I want you to turn to the next to the last page and read the editorial on page 14. It's all about taxes. It's important for you to learn different opinions on taxes, for they are informative. And by reading different opinions, you can learn from others. You'll have to pay taxes throughout your lives, and it's not something that you can avoid. You know the old saying, the only thing that you know for certain in life is death and taxes.
Why do we have to read this junk? Well, this is so stupid.
Be quiet. No talking without teacher permission. Don't you know the rules? What's wrong with you? Now turn to page 14 and read silently, and when everyone is finished, we'll talk about what you think. Good job, Susan. I really like the way that you're working on what I asked. Keep it up. Yes, Jane.
I just wanted to remind you that I have to leave 10 minutes early to go meet with another teacher.
Okay, thank you for reminding me.
My pleasure.
That's it. I am tired of your disobedience. Go to the principal's office and wait for me there until the end of class. You will be suspended from school if I have anything to do about it.
You can suspend me, I don't care. I don't know who you think you is. I'm tired of you. I should drop your class anyway.
The next person I catch seriously misbehaving is going to the office too. So you better read your editorial silently, and when everyone is finished, we'll discuss its meaning. Thank you for sitting in your seat, not getting out of your seat, and doing what I asked. Because you are behaving appropriately, you will receive 5 extra bonus points on the next quiz. Thank you for your cooperation. Okay, folks, put down the newspapers and let's discuss the content of the editorial on taxes. What did you think of the author's statement?